Live from the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm Vasilios. That is Sean Fazan. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the little bell notification button. You get notified every time we go live and every time we post a new podcast. Sean, we are live again. Yeah. It is good to do this.
Yeah, we are back live here on this Wednesday to talk some Saints topics here as we get into the regular season finale game, obviously this weekend against the Atlanta Falcons, and that's normally where we would go. But there have been some news items that have kind of come out that is important for us to discuss as we get into this podcast here. So be sure to like, share, rate, review. Jump on into the live stream if you haven't already. Like us, share it, subscribe, all that good stuff here on the YouTube channel as we get started here on this other edition of the Overtime Podcast, live edition of the Overtime Podcast.
All right, so obviously the big news today, Marshon Lattimore restructuring his contract with the Saints. What does that mean for him and the team? Yeah,
I wanted to start with this today because Marshon Lattimore's name came up twice today, one for a news-related item, this being that the restructured contract for 2024 came out earlier today from a report from ESPN. And it also came up today because both he and Mike Thomas were brought up to Dennis Allen. We'll get into Michael Thomas a little bit later. They're both obviously on IR. They're not going to be ready to play. But for the situation at hand with Lattimore, I didn't think we'd be getting into this soon because, the Saints normally have their process. They know what the cap situation is going to be like in a future year, but they let the season play out, and then, they evaluate, and then they do what they have to do. Almost always it's slashing, because usually they're projected to be over the cap. And I think the last projection I saw had them at $88 million over the cap, which, of course, always sounds like a daunting figure, but they always have to do it. Find ways to make money. It's not a great thing. It's not a terrible thing. It is just the way they approach business because they have no other choice. They're league mandated to get under the salary cap. But this is a rarity because we normally don't see it happening in the previous season's regular season before the prior season has even ended. But it's going to be one of those conversions, at least according to that report, where a high base salary was chopped down, but the difference in the high base salary and the chopped down amount, they converted that into a signing bonus and spread it out over the life of the contract from Marshon Lattimore. This is a standard operating procedure when it comes to the Saints and their salary cap, and Mickey Loomis and obviously Kai Harley, who was in charge of the numbers. It's going to create, again, according to that report, haven't really got into the minutia of the technicalities of Lattimore's contract, but it should create about $11 million in space for the Saints, which would, do the math, drop them down to $76 or $77 million over the cap. Big picture, couple things. One, not surprising in the least. Marshon Lattimore is, 27, 28 years old. When he's healthy, he's been a shutdown corner. He had a fantastic season this year. Before he was injured in that Minnesota game. So the fact that he would be chosen to restructure, and they're not losing any money. Y'all know this. Mm-hmm. They're not losing any money. They're converting money, base salary money, into a signing bonus, and then they get that money kind of straight ahead. So, or right off the bat, as opposed to in intervals during the NFL regular season. So not surprising that he'd be one of the ones that they would choose. The other big picture item is this. Had it gone haywire this season, which they have stabilized regardless of what happened Sunday, they have stabilized a bit to where they've won 3 out of their last 4 games. I know we've even kind of hinted at it, or at least brought up the subject of maybe he's a guy, if all things went south and you got to really blow this thing up and go in a different direction, would he be someone the Saints would be interested in putting on the block? On the surface, he's a guy other teams would probably find, a commodity to at least have discussions about trading, but that's not going to happen now with this restructure and this. And to be fair, I'm not sure what would have happened in the other situation either, because honestly, it complicates things when you trade it. It's not always the cap space you get, but you get assets obviously in return. But this guarantees he's not going to be traded. He's going to be here next year because it would cost him all kind of crazy amounts in dead money. And it really gets tricky when you talk about trading a player. But by this conversion, this restructure, whatever you want to call it, they'll save cap space in 2024. It raise his number in 2025 and beyond, but it goes to show you that he's in their future plans, at least for the immediate future, 2024 and probably 2025 as well. This despite the fact that after a very healthy start to his career, he's now missed 17 games in the last 2 seasons. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
That's a lot. But I do think when healthy, he's one of the top 5 or 6 cornerbacks in the league, and DA loves him. So I think the only thing that's different about this, or that was unexpected about this, is that it happened now. Normally this happens in March or February or even into April, because they're just, hey, I need space here, we convert here. We need space there, convert here. They got started a little early this year, which is a little bit different, but it's not like we didn't see it coming. There's going to be more, too. It could be a restructure coming for Eric McCoy. The big one's going to be Derek Carr. He's got a $30 million base salary next year, so that'll get chopped down, and that'll be converted into signing bonus. He even said in a NOLA.com article that he was absolutely on board with doing that. And if you know the Saints, the way they operate, when you look at the kind of the spreadsheet, if you will, the base salary column, if it's got a very high base salary, there's a strong chance at some point before the season starts, it's going to get chopped down. And they're going to convert it to a bonus just for the cap configurations. Other guys, Eric McCoy is possible. There's a difference between, chopping down the base salary and converting it to signing bonus and converting a roster bonus into a signing bonus. There are a couple of guys that could potentially do that. There's Ruiz and Granderson could potentially do that. That's how you save some cap space as well. And then there's some tricky ones that would seem obvious, but given where they're at in their respective careers, is that the move they're going to make? Because again, as we said, when you do this, what's the risk? You have to hold on to players maybe a little bit longer than you want to. Taysom Hill's got a high base salary next year. DeMario Davis has a higher base salary next year. Alvin Kamara has a higher base salary next year. Those would all be likely targets to restructure if they want them back in 2024 because of those high base salaries. But you got to take a look at the franchise and where they're headed and where they're at in their career and how much longer they want to play and if it's worth it, all those sort of things. But those would be some other names to consider as well. But the bottom line, the first shoe has dropped, or the first move has been made in terms of getting the Saints cap compliant in 2024, which they always do. It's not worthy of praise. It's not worthy of criticism. It's just they have to do it because it's league mandated to get under the salary cap.
All right, so that's their biggest star fixed for the future. All right, now today at practice, Alvin Kamara missed practice with a ankle injury. How concerning is that if you're the Saints?
I think it's something to really watch. I really do. I think it's something to really watch. I mean, he's your only back that's done anything of any significance this season. I know Jamal Williams had a couple of runs last week, but the search for that number 2 back, to me, has still been it hasn't been nearly as easy as many people thought it would be behind Kamara. And look, I know we've been critical of Kamara in terms of where he's at in the hierarchy of backs in the NFL, but he's still our best option. Make no mistake about it. He's still our best option at running back, but we're running the ball and catching the ball. So I do think it's concerning. And if he doesn't practice and he can't go, or he's limited in any way when the game comes around, who do you turn to? I mean, again, we've seen Jamal Williams. He's been pretty steady, and I think he's a guy the locker room likes. But let's be real, he hasn't had the same season he had last year in Detroit.
No.
Kendre Miller, I think he was limited in practice today. As a matter of fact, let's look at that.
Yeah, my phone's over there. So.
Let me look at that. Let me get the exact there. Was it Kendre Miller?
Yeah,
Kendre Miller is limited with an ankle. It feels like we've been waiting for that guy to come back on the field forever. McCoy was limited. Olave limited. Turner still on IR, but he was limited. Juwan Johnson, Lonnie Johnson, Kamara, Sewell, Landon Young, and Colin Saunders all did not practice. So back to the topic at hand. I do think it's a concern because I think he's their best back, and he's arguably their best player on offense. So who do you turn to? I think it's pretty obvious who you turn to. You turn to number 7, Taysom Hill, if you can't go. And just check Taysom's history against the Falcons. It's good. He's done well against the Falcons, whatever position he's played. I know he had the fumble the last time they played back in, week 12. But even when he was playing traditional quarterback, he had good games against the Falcons.
Yeah,
so
last
I would
season
think
he had
Taysom.
a couple good ones, right?
Yeah, and I can recall a game where he had 3 touchdowns against the Falcons. It was in Georgia or in Atlanta a couple of years back. So that's who you would turn to. But again, you can't just do that. I mean, you can give him his touches and maybe he gets a few more carries. But I kind of feel like the last couple of weeks, the traditional QB power game with Taysom has kind of leveled off a little bit. He's been doing more zone read, QB draw type stuff. So I think that's something to really monitor. It is concerning because, I mean, if you're the Saints, you got to have some kind of run game, and they were able to control the line of scrimmage last week in Tampa Bay, and you certainly want to keep that going. And they were able to get enough in the ground game to certainly be effective.
All right, so another player we need to touch on here, Mike Thomas, Sean, and we didn't really talk a lot about this before we got on, but he's just not ready.
Yeah. Again, none of this is a surprise. Dennis Allen was asked specifically about Lattimore and Thomas, and it was a follow-up question about Thomas, which I believe Jeff Duncan was the reporter that asked him. He just said he's not ready yet and going through the rehab process and blah, blah, blah. We had a pod about this, last week? A week ago? If you're surprised by this, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I got quite a reaction when I tweeted that out on social media about that quote about him not being ready. Look, the guy's got a history of longer than anticipated timelines for recovery when it comes to injuries. This happened. This was supposedly a knee injury, a knee bruise. Or I don't want to speculate, but. So that's the Minnesota game. That was what? That was week 10? Yeah, week 10. So, do the math. And look, this was supposed to be initially they thought this was not going to be all that serious, and
they never think it's going to be that
we are.
serious with
It's
Mike.
never that it never feels like it's anything serious, Michael Thomas, and you keep waiting and waiting and waiting. The fact that he will not play in this regular season anymore is of no surprise to me. The question is, and the question always seems to be, I feel like we've asked this question the last 3 or 4 seasons, did he play his last game in black and gold? And we've been wrong about that, as we mentioned in the last pod, because I thought last year was his last year in black and gold. The year before that was his last year in black and gold. But he has somehow managed to come back. Look, I'll own it if I'm wrong, but I think it's it. I think this is it for Michael Thomas. We'll see what happens when they get into the postseason, but I'm not picking up on the vibe that he's got a future in New Orleans. I think it's probably run its course with Michael Thomas in New Orleans. You almost feel like the organization has just moved on. This is 4 years in a row of injuries, and of course we talked about the social media activity where he can't control himself, and it still doesn't dawn on him that, I guess, it's not the best thing to do in the world. He deleted his Twitter account. But all that stuff would be fine if he was still healthy and available and productive and a very good player. He had a decent season before he got hurt, but it's almost like you knew the injury was coming at some point. And it came, and he's been out for an extended absence, and he's not going to be back for the regular season, and we'll see what happens in the postseason. But man, I don't know about you, Sil, but let's just say for the sake of argument, they make the postseason. Do you feel like he'd be ready to go when the postseason started?
I mean, it's impossible to say. Really, it's just
it really is.
I can't. I mean, I feel like if the stakes were high enough, he'd try to fight through something and convince the coaching staff to let him come back, but. I feel like he burned some bridges with his Twitter rant. Sometimes
you kind of get that feeling as well, just on the kind of saying it without saying it kind of vibe you get from the organization. And they've left it very vague, but we're going to keep that in house with the situation where he was kind of calling out the quarterback he helped recruit here. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride for Mike Thomas in New Orleans. What would be interesting, though, in the offseason is if they were to move on, how they would maneuver that, because what he's on the books for, how you would have to probably do it. It would probably have to be a post-June 1st cut from Michael Thomas. We're getting way ahead of ourselves, but I just think it's probably run its course. And you could probably, when the season's over, get someone that can, at least at some point in their career, match the level of what Michael Thomas is currently giving you. And they have a couple of young guys that I know they certainly like in that wide receiver room as well. And they have kind of, let's also look at this. And I don't think this is directly tied to Michael Thomas, but the offense has gelled a little bit these last couple of weeks, especially in the passing game and the Carr being in sync with his receivers and his tight ends. So, the offense has kind of moved on. They would welcome him back if he was healthy, obviously, we think. But he's just not available, so there's nothing to really say. There's nothing really else to add. He's just not available.
Well, I wonder who we'll see back on the field first, Mike Thomas or Peyton Turner?
Oh, you went there, huh? It feels like Peyton Turner's getting closer and closer. I see his name on these injury reports, and my goodness, they could certainly use him. I thought the pass rush really picked up last week, and it would be nice to have a fresh player available this late in the season who would be coming back healthy and just with a lot of energy and just wanting to be on the field and playing with some passion. It would be great to see another player like that on the field, because God knows they could use another pass rusher, especially on the edge. And he's another one. You just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. But it's just you talk more about him not being on the field than what he actually does for you on the field, which it's just been too small of a sample size over 3 seasons now. So I guess we'll have to wait for that hypothetical to play itself out.
All right. So any final thoughts as we head into this week 18? Sean?
Yeah, I should probably do a whole separate pod on this, but I can't ignore we focus on Saints, but I can't ignore the big news today up in Baton Rouge as well. And I said it on Overtime Tuesday night as I got a greater appreciation of just how bad LSU's defense was when I saw the LSU-Wisconsin game and how poorly coached that defense was. And I said on Overtime, Brian Kelly's just got to turn over the whole defensive staff. He did that today. And honestly, if he was watching the film, that anybody could see, it was from the scheme to the lack of coaching up the guys to the dip in talent, in particular in the secondary. That was a collapse and a catastrophe on the defensive side of the ball, and it had to happen. It happened today. Kudos to Brian Kelly for making the call. You should never celebrate someone getting fired. That's just not a cool thing to do. These are all human beings, but this move had to be made, and it's one of those things where if you get some better coaching, I'm talking just hands-on, coach them up coaching, and just a regular scheme, nothing crazy or fancy or complex, just a regular scheme that can get you in the middle of the pack of the SEC. I think LSU could be back in the mix for college football playoff real soon.
I guess you can say Brian Kelly cleaned house.
Yeah, he cleaned house. Yes, he cleaned house.
All right. For Sean Fazan, I'm Vasilios. This has been the Fox and Overtime Podcast. We'll catch you guys on Friday.